Thank you all for joining today's live session. My name is Meesha Rosa. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Board Services at Catalyst, a global nonprofit working with some of the world's most powerful CEOs and leading companies to build workplaces that work for women. I lead the Catalyst Women on Board initiatives. I'm happy to have today two very accomplished business leaders, board directors, and alumni of Catalyst Women on Board to talk about their unique pathway to the boardroom, the power of sponsorship, and paying it forward and inspiring future women leaders. With us, we have Ann Taylor, Director, Group 1 Automotive, Southwestern Energy, Whiting Petroleum, Conway MacKenzie, and she is a past mentee of the Catalyst Women on Board US program. We also have Kiren Singh, Director of Pieridae Energy and Travel Alberta, and a past mentee of the Catalyst Women on Board Canadian program. Welcome, Ann and Kiren. Clearly, as successful women business leaders, it's not uncommon to begin conversations about the current state of affairs. So, while we've seen progress for women on corporate boards in the US and Canada, growth has been slow. But what's been promising is that despite all of the obstacles, the two of you were able to secure and successfully gain a board seat. So, I want to start first by asking what made you interested in joining a corporate board? We'll start with Ann.
Thank you, Meesha, and thanks to Catalyst for the opportunity to be here and for all you've done for women and advancing women in the workforce. I am joining you from my lovely Airbnb in Houston. So given that in this virtual world, I tend to notice the background surroundings of others and think they say something about them. I tried to remove the artwork, but unfortunately it was glued on. So I won't take it with me. When I thought about my next chapter, I really had two goals. And the first one was to continue to help people, particularly women, develop and progress. And the second one was that I wanted to be able to continue to be involved in complex business challenges. And so I knew that this next chapter would mean a professional role kind of portfolio to be able to address both of those. So the first thing I did is I went back to school and got my executive coaching certificate. And I do work in that area, which allows me to continue to help women advance. But then I looked at board roles as a way to provide the opportunity for continuous learning. And I have definitely seen many interesting business challenges in that role. And I thought it would really offer me an opportunity to work with peers, people from a variety of businesses, different backgrounds, different experiences, and that I could learn from continuously and that would challenge me. And so that's really what I was looking for and certainly what I've been able to find.
Kiren, what were your motivations?
Well, thank you again, Meesha, for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and share my path to the boardroom with your viewers. And my drivers and motivations were really not dissimilar from Ann's. The first was really my interest in those macro level issues, coming at it from an enterprise risk management perspective, not only looking at the risks associated with cybersecurity, cloud computing, ESG strategies, digitization, but also looking at the opportunities that those risks created for organizations in terms of driving innovation and driving performance. I think the second aspect, what really interested me, was being visible and really challenging some of those stereotypes in the energy industry, and also being visible to multiple stakeholders within the organization, be it employees, investors, suppliers, and really creating that sense of belonging, creating that culture of inclusivity, and being, so to speak, a role model in terms of creating that sense of belonging for people, and that will ultimately drive their experience within the organization and ultimately their commitment to the organization and finally the performance of the organization. So that was a really important driver for me as well.
Right. And it's not always a clear pathway to any senior leadership role. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the challenges you might have faced in the beginning of your journey? You want to talk, Ann, about any obstacles you might have faced?
So in terms of the journey to kind of get to the boardroom, I was fortunate that my prior roles as an executive at Deloitte had really given me a pretty broad network. So I definitely had the network in place. But I think what challenge I faced in just viewing the board role and being sure I spoke about my interests appropriately, and certainly in terms of joining the board was to go from being a leader to a primary player as a member of a team. And that's different than I think most people come to the boardroom. We're part of a team and we have no staff. So there are pros and cons. I looked forward to the change, both in terms of that role, and I consciously made it. But I think the challenge then was thinking about how to fit into that role and really adjust to it, because I'd spent so many years, decades, in a leadership role and managing others. And I got perhaps the best advice on that from my Catalyst Women on Board mentor. He said to me, when you go into a meeting think of having 6 or 7 marbles in your pocket, and you get to play those on the topics where you can add the most value to the team. And don't try and pull them all out at one time, but realize you have a finite number. So that was a bit of a challenge. I'm not saying I always take that advice. I always intend to, but I sometimes drop back into my old mindset. But generally speaking, that has been really good advice in terms of figuring out how to play. And I actually think it's good advice when you're interviewing for a board seat, just figuring out, what the marbles are, so to speak, the special value adds you have. So you're talking about that, not how you can be all things to all people.
Right. And some of us are just joining in the audience. So I just want to remind people that we're having a really great conversation with Anne and Kiren about their pathway to the boardroom. So Kiren, any challenges and obstacles that you might have faced that were unique to your pathway to the boardroom?
Well, I think you spoke of the issues and the challenges in your introduction in terms of women and women on boards, and the dearth of those parameters in terms of the boards, the board opportunities that are presented. But I really, what I'm seeing is really an accelerated path to boardways, and that's coming from multiple stakeholders, whether it's investors, regulators, society in general. Those aspects of it are putting pressure on organizations to really accelerate not only women on board, but also broader forms of diversity on the boards as well. And in Canada, in particular, we have a call to action by investors that are really requiring companies to disclose their diversity data, much like sustainability data, the timelines, and really to be more reflectant of the population in the country at large. And finally, I think that we're all kind of getting to the point where we see the importance of diversity, and we're there've been a ton of studies on this, but it's also not only the studies that have been done, but we're actually seeing the performance in terms of enhancing the overall cognitive capacity, so to speak, at the board by having those diverse voices. So I think all of those aspects have really helped to accelerate women on board. And I think finally is really having a robust network that you can draw upon, so that when there are opportunities to present women and women of color and really broader forms of diversity on boards, that you have a broad slate of candidates to really draw upon to be able to bring to the table, bring to the nominating committee. And that's for all the board members, not only the women of color and the women, but all the board members' responsibility.
Kiren, I want to touch a little bit more on that point about access to the boardroom for women of color, because in particular, 6% of the seats that are held across the US and Canada are occupied by women of color. And so I want to get a little bit of a sense from you how you've managed yourself as a board candidate, as a woman of color, to be a serious candidate for a boardroom.
Well, and I think that's an important question. And I think it really comes down to 2 factors. There's the confidence and there's the credibility, and that whole sense of having your voice heard at the table. Confidence really comes from not only formal education in Canada. We have the Director's Education Program, really outstanding program leading to the ICD.D designation that provides foundational framework for aspiring board members, and also it provides ongoing continuous education, so you know what the issues are. Things are changing rapidly. Having grounding in those important issues is really critical. The second aspect of it is having experiences and best practices that you can bring from other boards to the table to have a meaningful dialogue and elevate the overall conversation. So that confidence you're getting from your experience and from your background education is critical. I think the other element element that's really important is really your ability to be credible. And that really goes back to a comment that Anne made at the outset with the marbles in the pocket, was really, picking your points and picking your subjects that you can really bring important aspects of the conversation, elevate those conversations. And really, if you have credibility and you have confidence, your voice is going to be heard at the table. And then that helps to expand people's views, and it helps to then encourage other people to come up to the board. And, one of the greatest satisfactions for me was having, women of color within the organization coming up to me and saying, we really appreciate you being on our board. And that was, highly satisfying for me. And it encourages other people to do the same.
Well, I mean, you're speaking about mentorship and coaching and advising and others serving as sounding boards for you. And I want to touch a little bit about your involvement with board service for leadership development and maybe how you've helped future women leaders around board readiness and women of color sort of gain entree into the boardroom.
Well, during my time at Deloitte, my last role was as managing partner of the Houston office. And one of the things we thought would add value in the community and to our clients was identifying board ready women. So women who already should be in the boardroom, but weren't getting there. And in different ways in the Catalyst program, helping them find access and preparation. One of the things I think is most important to understand if you're seeking a board role is that, a board bio is not a resume. And I know that my mentor gave me help on this, the Catalyst program did, but helping people understand how to craft your story in a one-pager that now speaks differently to who you'd be as a board member. And so I think that's one of the things that I've continued to work with people on personally is I'll send you samples, I'll show you mine, I'll critique yours. What are the ways to get, your story told? Now, I think one thing, just to touch on one of the things Kiren said, it's great to have a great network so you can help draw on others, but also one of the opportunities we have that I had not thought so much about till I ended up on the board was, of course, we can be part of the change personally, adding women to the boardroom, but we can help the organization stay focused on diversity and advancing women and people of color into the C-suite, because the way you get a board opportunity is having the right experience. And where we see the dearth of opportunities today or real representation is in those senior leadership roles. And so, we provide oversight as board members on leadership development and succession planning and equity. And so that's a great opportunity to be part of the conversation.
When you look at the pipeline of future women leaders coming into the C-suite positions and those revenue generating roles, there's a set of competencies and skills that they have. One of the biggest hurdles that we hear from women and women of color is having that trusted advisor or someone who can speak on your behalf as a serious board candidate. Why is sponsorship so critical? I want to ask you, as mentees of Catalyst Women on Board US and Canada, Kiren, why is sponsorship or was so critical for you as part of this program?
Well, I think both aspects of your program are really critical, both the sponsorship aspect and the mentorship aspect. And, from the sponsorship perspective is really having that champion there in your court to introduce you to their network. The context within which they're making those introductions is critical, really, to secure a board seat and accelerate that process. I think the mentorship aspect in terms of giving you that critical feedback, giving you that support, and will really help not only your board prospects, but also your effectiveness when you're actually at the board table. So being a champion of you, being able to hear what they're saying from a non-biased perspective is really critical, I think, to helping to establish your confidence and then your effectiveness as a board member.
And among all of the actual strategies and the plans that you developed with your mentor sponsor, which one was the most impactful, Kiren?
Well, I think that the process itself was the most impactful. The structure of the process, the formality of the process in terms of, scheduling time to meet with your mentor, having an agenda ready, knowing the key points that you want to address with your mentor. And that formality of the aspects and the regularity with which you're meeting with your mentor was really the most important in terms of a catalyst for acceleration. And then I think really that ongoing relationship with your mentor sponsor post the program is critical to establishing, as you go, having that sounding board, and also having that friendship and lifetime friendship, and an opportunity also to give back to them in meaningful ways in their career as well.
Right. And you have a unique situation where you were coming from the professional services area, and they have internal policies not allowing their executives to serve on outside boards. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you were able to leverage your relationship with your mentor sponsor.
So this could be true for professional services firms. There could be some others that have similar kinds of independence requirements, or even just time commitment requirements where you cannot be on a board while currently in your executive role. And so for me, this was all about preparation and, not having a gap between the time you wrap up your executive role and moving to that next chapter. Of course, we all want a little time and a little break, but, not letting it get stale. And I'd say the best advice I got from my mentor about that was, he told me his goal was for me to be the most successful board member that I could be. He didn't say to land a board seat. So he said, and I hope that would be my goal. And so I really started thinking about this, not about how do I get on a board, but how do I become the most successful board member? And, if you start thinking that way as you're preparing, then you do the right things to be prepared. And I think it helps you even in any interview process, because you're much more focused, not on, so to speak, kind of the right answers, but thinking about the board and your role as a board member.
Right. And so that was your one-to-one relationship. But as you think about, and for those joining us today, we're talking about the pathway to the boardroom. As you think about the advancement of women into the boardroom, are there other examples that you might share within your existing boardroom involvement or your professional networks, or just in general advice around how to advance or propel women into the boardroom? Are there other examples you might want to share with the audience today?
Well, I've got one just to highlight, and that is that I think a lot of women in particular like to play by the rules. And so there's a perception amongst the women I've met that, I'll get my resume out, I'll send it to a bunch of people on email, I'll particularly send it to recruiters. And you probably have the current statistics, but at the time I was looking for a role, people told me about 20% of all the board seats are filled by recruiters. And so I think sometimes there's hesitancy as to then how do I network? What do I do? And I felt like a lot of women were waiting for the recruiter to call them. And so I think the important thing is to really think about, who is your network? Where is it? How do you build it? How do you keep building it? To be sure that the right people know who you are, because I think the real examples come from, who did get placed. It was usually someone who could speak up and sponsor someone else, not necessarily the formal sponsor through the Catalyst program, but someone else who sits on a board who says, hey, I know so-and-so. Our most recent board seat on one of my boards was filled by hey, I served with this person on another board and they're great. And that ended up being the person we added.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, now that you're appointed to a board, what next? So, it's not enough for companies to name a woman onto a board, but how can boards and other directors help foster an area of inclusion or an environment of inclusion, especially for newly appointed women and women of color onto a board? Kiren, in your appointments to your recent boards, how did you ensure your voice was heard? How did your directors foster an inclusive environment for you to feel that the onboarding process was seamless or you felt included?
Well, I think that, that's a really important issue in terms of fostering that sense of inclusion within the board. And first of all, it's really creating that sense of awareness of what is inclusion and really why is inclusion important. And I touched on that at the beginning in terms of saying, how does that foster a sense of commitment to the organization? How does that foster a sense of psychological safety? Because when you're in an environment that is inclusive, you can really create that synergistic value that really board members are trying to do, especially when dealing with some of these really challenging issues. I spoke about credibility, I spoke about confidence. Those are all really important elements, but really ensuring that the boards have an awareness of inclusion. And there's all kinds of really illuminating inclusion training courses that are fantastic to understand not only what is inclusive behavior, but also really why it's important and why, how it really accelerates the performance of the board and really creating those high performance boards by having people that are there that feel that sense of inclusion, that feel that sense of belonging to the board.
Right. And Anne, one of our Catalyst board directors, Mary Cranston, has said that as soon as she joins a board, she joins a particular committee, and that is the Nominating and Governance Committee. So for the both of you, but particularly for Anne, what committees are you involved with, and how are you working with your existing boards to ensure that they're fostering inclusive environments for newly appointed directors?
So my experience is that when you join the board, you'll often get asked where you're interested in serving. My attitude was I'll serve where needed, especially as the newest board member. And usually they are kind of, not pigeonholing, but kind of targeting you for certain areas where you might serve. So I didn't kind of pick and choose, but now I serve on the Compensation and Human Resources Committee on all of the boards on which I'm on, and also on the ESG committee on one and on 2 audit committees. And so a little bit different area, but I chair the Compensation and Human Resource Committee on 2 boards. And so it gives me a great opportunity to continue to provide some of this oversight. A lot of people don't want to get involved with executive compensation. I find it gives you a good chance to get to know the CEOs, know how they think, but it also gives you a good chance to, I think, particularly as we move forward, really be thinking broadly about people, all the issues that Kiren pointed to, diversity, succession planning, and advancement.
Right. And just to probe a bit more on that, do you find that you have a voice in the process of the selection of directors, diverse, gender diverse, or racially diverse directors? And how? And how do you actually contribute to those conversations, Anne?
Well, I think the first thing you look for is, are you seeing resumes that are diverse? Are you, when they come in, are you looking at a broad array of candidates? And I say this, whether we're looking at the pipeline or we're looking at board candidates, is, if they all kind of look the same, I just want the next best one, whoever they are, that you can come up with that has some diversity to them, not just diversity of thought, but also background. And, if that's a big gap, it shouldn't be in terms of board seats, because we all know that the candidates are out there. But if it's inside the organization, then what are we going to do to fill that gap?
Right. I have one question. Let's pivot a bit to the audience, because I have a question that's particularly about the rules, the seen and the unseen. And one of the audience members has asked, are there any unwritten rules or things you didn't anticipate during your experience that you could share? And anyone can jump in on that one, Kiren or Anne.
So I guess of course there are lots, because there are norms of every team, and so it takes a while to learn the norms. And so I would say it's different for every board. There's a board where there has been a kind of unwritten rule that that the CEO puts together materials, leads the agenda, blah blah blah. And maybe I didn't expect it to be that way initially. And thought that the board chairman played a different role. So I think the board chairman sets a tone. You need to understand how they run the meetings, how they operate, what they expect of you going into it. I don't think it's an unwritten rule. I think it's a written rule. You need to be prepared. So, you're going to get volumes of documents to review and be ready if you're on a public company board. And, this can go in cycles. So it could be a lot if you're on multiple boards all in the same month, and then there could be something less. And kind of the unwritten rule or written rule is you need to make yourself available. And right. So things can happen at any point in time. Be ready for peaks and valleys.
Right. Kiren, I see you ready to answer that question.
It's very interesting, because in a way, I agree with everything Anne said, but I would also add that in COVID, everything was thrown out the window. So those norms that were there were also disrupted by, having a pandemic, where you're moving from a situation where, you have a very structured process. Everybody's in a way, used to being in that process. And all of a sudden you have COVID, and you're not just meeting 5 times a year, but you're meeting, weekly to deal with the impact of the pandemic on the organization. And I think that the pace and the acceleration of change that we're seeing now is really what's also driving, you know, this disruption at the board table. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to kind of reset and level set, you know, at a new level in terms of what gets spoken, what the norms are, and recreating those in a new and interesting way, and in a very inclusive way, because you need those voices at the table in order to really bring the best out, as I said before, in terms of the performance of the organization and grapple with these really challenging issues that we're facing across the board.
Right.
And Kiren, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I found that we had people in industries that are going through a lot of transformation. If you're on a board in industry where there's a lot of M&A activity, you don't know when the meetings are going to come up, and it could, you know, it could be 2 meetings a week at one point in time.
Yes, absolutely.
And so if you think about what we're grappling today in terms of the challenges that we face as we ease out of the pandemic, all of the social movements that are occurring, what types of competencies do you think that future women leaders should be preparing themselves for? What are some of the key competencies that you think that they should ensure that they're getting access to, or that their company should be ensuring that they get access to prepare for the boardroom?
Well, I think you know, it's really broad competencies, and the more exposure you can get throughout your organization, the broader experiences that you can bring to the table is really going to help and serve you well. And not only experiences within your organization, but experiences outside your organization as well. Having that diversity of experience that then you can draw upon and bring to the board table, because the issues are changing, and they're changing very quickly. So no one, you know, specific career path is right or wrong. It's really getting the diverse experience so that you can bring those experiences to the board table to grapple with the issues that board members are having to be and that are being asked to deal with in this day and age.
What does the skill matrix look like, and what are some of those skills and competencies?
Yeah, so I think, you know, nobody puts it on there, but being a continuous learner, kind of the way Kiren mentioned, is critical. But, you know, usually every board has a list of what they think might be some competencies, you know, financial expertise, technology, strategy. Now we've added, you know, human resources or human capital. So there's a list of those, and then they put the directors on the other side of that matrix and put check marks, you know, where they filled them, and try to make sure there are multiple people in every, you know, row or column as you align that. And so right now, I think that we've moved from a high focus on financial expertise. I think that's where a lot of people came from, to some of the things like strategy, technology, human resources. And those things I don't think got as much play in the, you know, time before I joined a board. Fortunately played very well for me, because those were my areas of expertise, but I see it now on the boards as things that people are actually really looking for.
Right. And Kiren, I was thinking that, you know, with the issues around climate change and corporate social responsibility, that those would be some key or core competencies that boards would be looking for as they begin to expand their board skills matrix. We're soon or near the end or the conclusion of our conversation. So I wanted to wrap up to kind of think about, and if you could share quickly some tips, insights, or pieces of advice for those that are joining us today, so that they can have some key takeaways. So if you quickly think about, the both of you, what would be the one piece of advice, and that could be some bulleted points, you would share with the audience, what would that be?
Well, I would say, you know, to really be tenacious and to be patient with the process, to really expand your network and continue to network and let people know that you're interested in joining a board. Be prepared. Get your education, get your experience however you can from the vantage point that you are at, and then really let your voice be heard. Send in your resume, make sure that people are aware of what you would like to do with your career.
Okay. And then Anne, and in addition to that, some of the soft skills that you might talk about as well, you can add with that, the competencies or tips for women.
Well, I'd say, you know, keep looking to add the soft skills, you know, join, whether, you know, the NACD or other areas there where you really know how a board operates. So you're prepared to join. But I was going to add the same one that Kiren, or one of she had, which is, if you're interested in serving on a board, let people know. Cast a wide net in sharing your interest. I got one board opportunity from a recruiter I'd met 3 years before I was even in a position to serve. And I got another one from a person I did not know based on us being randomly seated next to each other at a charity luncheon. But when they just were having chit chat and asked, what are you interested in doing? I mentioned it, and that led to an opportunity. So I'd say let people know, and just be a continuous learner and develop your skills. Know what boards do. Don't do it just for the sake of saying it sounds interesting to me, or I'm going to put it, on my checklist of things to do.
Right. Well, we all know that being prepared, being skilled, and having all the competencies that you need will definitely propel you into the boardroom. But what I would say is that we can't actually downplay the power of sponsorship, having influential others speak on your behalf, and having a sounding board. And with that, those that are actually interested in other information around sponsorship, please feel free to visit the Catalyst website. There's a host of tools, and also knowledge products and informationals to help guide your pursuit to the boardroom. And in addition to that, I would say join us for a recap. Occasionally, we have these conversations with our women on boarders from time to time. So come visit Catalyst so that we can have these conversations to help you as you begin to consider or seriously consider yourself as a board candidate. So I'd like to say thank you to you, Anne, and thank you to Kiren for joining us today for this very enlightening conversation, and also for sharing your insights and your pathway to the boardroom. Onward and upward, and I'm looking for more boards on your list of boards, and I'm looking to make sure that I'm encouraging you and rewarding you and recognizing you along the way. Thank you, Anne and Kiren.
Thank you, Meesha.